The night carried the cruel delicacy of a scalpel. The wind slid through the stained glass windows of the House of Palms, as if hesitant to utter a secret, and each blade of glass returned to me a different reflection of the same face, my own, as though the versions of me that had survived the last nights were silently arguing over which of them would have the courage to walk in. I stepped inside. The main hallway, with its wine-colored carpet and the family portraits framed in gold, smelled of old dust and varnish, but also of fear. It was the first time in my entire life that I recognized this scent without trying to hide from it. "He awaits you," said the oldest servant, his head bowed like someone asking forgiveness simply for existing. He did not say the name. He didn't have to. My father, the man I had spent half my life burying in memory, and the other half trying to kill again, was alive. Alive. It was as though the universe itself had played its cruelest card. I followed the servant down the corridor, where the shadows seemed to breathe, each step echoing like the prelude to a confession I had not asked for. The doors of the great hall opened with a groan, as though the hinges protested against revealing what lay beyond, and there he was, older, colder. A statue carved by time and bitterness. The fire in the fireplace painted the walls with restless silhouettes, but his eyes, they carried a storm that no flame could warm. For a heartbeat, the air itself seemed to retreat, as though the house understood before I did that nothing would remain the same after this encounter. "Son," he said at last, his voice a slow knife, cutting through years of absence, through graves I thought were sealed, through the naive belief that the dead could be trusted to stay dead. I did not answer. My silence was heavier than any word I could have spoken. Around us, the portraits of our ancestors watched with accusing eyes, their painted smiles stretched thin like cobwebs over tombstones. The storm outside leaned against the windows, listening, perhaps eager to carry our secrets to the night. He raised a hand, a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of decades. "Sit," he commanded, and though I wanted to turn my back, to spit on the floor, to leave this house of ghosts behind, my legs obeyed as though his voice were iron shackles around my will. The chair groaned under me, so did my soul. We were two men and 1,000 unsaid words, two lives gnawed by time and betrayal, two mirrors facing each other endlessly. He poured wine, dark, thick, like blood with manners. As he handed me the glass, I noticed the tremor in his hand. It was almost imperceptible. Almost. "Why?" I asked at last, my voice more ash than fire. It was the only question that mattered. His eyes met mine, ancient wells filled with storms. And then he smiled. Not with his lips, but with that cruel corner of the soul that smiles when the knife finally reaches the bone. "Because," he said softly, "the truth needed you alive long enough to destroy you." The wind howled at the windows like a choir of wolves. Somewhere deep in the house, a door slammed shut, as though the night itself were sealing us inside this pact of shadows. I tasted the wine. It burned, but not as much as his words. The fire cracked. Time held its breath. I realized then that whatever story I thought I'd been living was only the prologue, and the real tale, the one written in blood and silence, had just begun. The storm pressed its face against the stained glass windows, as though desperate to witness what was unfolding inside. My father leaned back in his chair, his shadow stretching long across the floor like the mark of a noose. Every word he hadn't yet spoken was a loaded gun waiting for its trigger. "You buried me too early," he said, his tone wrapped in a mockery, so sharp it could bleed stone. Even the grave refused me. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, to choke the truth out of him, but my tongue was a hostage and my fury, a chained beast pacing inside my chest. All I managed was a single breath, one that tasted of smoke and years wasted in ignorance. "You know," he continued, "what it means to erase a man before he dies, to carve his name off the earth while his pulse still beats?" His eyes glinted in the firelight. "Your mother did that to me long before you ever tried." The words struck like thrown stones. My mother, dead now, or so I believed, became a ghost all over again in that instant, and the walls seemed to lean closer to hear the accusations threading through the room. "You were a boy," he said, "and boys believe the stories they are told, but the men who tell them, they are liars, everyone." His hand closed around the wine glass until the stem cracked like a bone. "You think you know betrayal?" His voice rose, a slow tide swallowing the edges of my composure. "You have lived only the shadow of it. The true thing, the betrayal that rots generations, was born under this roof long before you first cried in your cradle." Lightning lit the room for a heartbeat. The portrait seemed to flinch. I almost did too. "What do you want from me?" I managed, my voice hoarse, foreign in my own ears. He looked at me then as though weighing the worth of my existence, like a merchant examining. "Flawed gold, what all fathers want," he said finally, "to be obeyed." The answer was too small for the rage in his eyes, too simple for the labyrinth of history coiled between us. "I won't kneel," I told him, though my voice lacked the certainty I wished it had. "You will," he said, calm as a blade resting on the skin before the cut. "They all do, in the end." The storm raged louder, shaking the windows like a warning. Somewhere upstairs, footsteps ran, too light to be a man's, too hurried to be innocent. The house had begun to wake, its long corridors whispering like throats clearing before confession. "There are others," he said, as though reading my thoughts. "People who've waited for this night as long as I have. People who have chosen sides." I hated how his words slithered into me, how every sentence planted a seed of dread in soil already too rich with fear. "And you," he added softly, "have been playing on the wrong side far too long." Before I could answer, the door creaked. Again! Another figure entered, a woman wrapped in black from throat to wrist, her veil glistening with rain, as though she had walked through the storm itself. When she lifted it, my breath caught. It was Alice, my sister, the one who had vanished years ago into rumor and silence, the one whose grave we never found because, we were told, there was nothing left to bury. She looked at me not like a sister, but like a stranger carrying a dagger behind her back. "Hello, brother," she said, her voice a velvet trap, and in her smile, I saw the night sharpen its claws. Alice crossed the room slowly, each step echoing like the ticking of a clock, counting down to some invisible doom. Her face was pale as marble, carved not by time, but by decisions made in the dark. I searched her eyes for the sister I remembered, the one who laughed in summer gardens, who whispered secrets to me when storms frightened the windows of our childhood home. She was not there. What looked back at me now carried no innocence, no warmth, only the glint of someone who had lived too long among shadows and learned their language by heart. "You're alive," I said, though the words felt foolish, useless. Of course she was alive. She stood before me, breathing, heart beating beneath that black dress. But what lived inside her? That I wasn't sure I recognized. "I've been many things," she answered softly, alive among them, but not the most important. My father watched us like a chess master studying two pawns that had forgotten their places on the board. His silence was worse than his words. It carried the weight of a verdict unspoken. "Why now?" I asked. My voice cracked like a door hinge too long unused. "Why come back after all these years?" She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that belongs to people who have buried too many truths under their tongues. "Because," she said, "the game is finally ready for its last move." The fire snapped behind her, as though even the flames recoiled. I felt the old house breathe, a long, slow exhale that carried dust from forgotten corners. You think you know this story, Alice continued, but you've only heard the lullaby, a version told to children so they can sleep at night. The real story is carved in bones, in betrayals so old they have moss growing on them. My father raised his glass again, as if to toast her words, or perhaps to bless the poison in them. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the room felt rigged, like speaking too loudly might set off some trap buried beneath the floorboards. What do you want from me? I asked again, this time to both of them. The father returned from the grave, the sister risen from absence, like a ghost wearing human skin. Alice glanced at him, then back at me. We want the truth, she said simply. And the truth, always, demands a price. Outside, thunder rolled closer, a drumbeat for revelations marching toward us, whether I was ready or not. My father finally spoke, his voice steady as the earth before an earthquake. Your mother, he said, lied to you. About everything. The air left the room. Even the fire seemed to pause, its flames holding still like breath drawn in shock. She told you I died, he continued. She told you Alice was lost. She told you the house was cursed by my sins alone. His hand slammed. The table, rattling the silverware, sending echoes through the hall like a gunshot seeking ears. She built that lie brick by brick until you lived inside it like a prison. I stared at Alice, but she only nodded slowly, as though each word were another nail sealing some invisible coffin. She did it to protect you, I said, though the words felt fragile, like paper shields before a firing squad. My father's laugh came then low, hollow, a sound that carried no joy at all. Protect you, he said. No, boy, she did it to protect herself. Lightning slashed the sky outside, and for a heartbeat I thought the whole house might split in two under its glare. Alice leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, meant for knives, not ears. She feared what you might become if you knew. The truth, she said. And now, brother, now we're all going to find out whether she was right. The storm outside broke at last, raining against the stained glass windows like an army laying siege. Shadows shook along the walls with every flash of lightning, turning the faces in the portraits into silent witnesses wearing expressions of horror. I could not speak. My thoughts spun like birds trapped in a chimney, frantic and useless. Everything I had believed about my father's death, my sister's disappearance, my mother's grief, lay in ruins before me, and yet the two people who had returned from absence, from graves both real and imagined, sat calmly as though this night had been rehearsed 100 times before. My father poured more wine, the red liquid catching the firelight like captured sunsets. He pushed the glass toward me, a silent command that tasted of ashes before it even reached my lips. You will hear everything, he said, because tonight is the night the walls stop keeping secrets. Alice leaned back, crossing her arms, her black dress swallowing the light. We were betrayed, she said simply. Not once, not by one person, by everyone. Her words dripped like cold water down my spine. Mother knew, my father added, his voice bitter as rust. She knew the council's plans, knew the deals signed under candlelight while you slept upstairs dreaming childish dreams. I shook my head slowly, refusing to let their accusations carve themselves into my understanding of the world. But their voices kept coming, relentless. Each sentence, another shovel of dirt thrown on the coffin of my ignorance. The council wanted the land, Alice said, her tone flat, factual, merciless. The House of Palm sits on veins of wealth so deep they make men greedy enough to kill their own blood. And they did, my father said sharply. His hand trembled as it wrapped around the wine glass again. They came for me first because I refused to sign it away. Your mother, she chose survival over loyalty. The storm roared agreement outside, its winds bending trees, its rain washing against the windows like the world itself wanted to eavesdrop. I stared at the floor because looking at their faces felt like staring into open graves. Why tell me now? My voice barely rose above the fire's crackle. Because, Alice said, her eyes glinting like knives catching light, they're coming for you next. Those words landed heavier than thunder. They think you own what they couldn't steal from father, she continued. They think you know where it is. My father leaned forward then, his face carved by firelight into something half man, half shadow. You have to choose, he said. Stand with us, or vanish like she did. The mention of my mother struck like iron across my ribs. Memories of her face, her lullabies, her trembling hands on cold mornings. They rose unbidden, ghosts rattling their chains. She protected me, I insisted. Weakly, though even as I said it, the words tasted hollow. She protected herself, Alice snapped, by giving them everything they asked for. Except one thing. I lifted my head, her gaze locked on mine like a trap closing. She never told them where father hid the papers, she said. The proof, the deeds, the records that could burn the whole council to the ground. The fire hissed as rain struck. The chimney above? A serpent's whisper sliding down into our gathering of ghosts. My father's voice dropped to a growl. And now, they will come for you. Because they think you have them. Lightning struck again, close this time. The whole house shuddered, and somewhere upstairs a door slammed as though the storm itself wanted inside. I realized, with a coldness spreading through my chest, that tonight was no reunion. It was a warning wearing the mask of family. The wind screamed through the cracks of the old house as though the world itself had grown impatient with our silence. My father stood slowly, his shadow stretching across the floor until it touched my boots like a threat made of darkness. They will come before dawn, he said. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but they will come. Alice rose too, her veil forgotten on the chair, her face a mask carved from storms. And when they do, she added, this house will either stand as a fortress or burn as a pyre. I swallowed hard, my throat thick with words I didn't know how to speak. The fire cracked behind us, casting the three of us in restless light, a family portrait painted by the hands of madness itself. You want me to fight? I said finally. My father's eyes locked on mine, cold and unyielding. I want you to survive, he corrected. But survival demands loyalty, the kind your mother refused to give. His words hung in the air like gallows waiting for a neck. She said she loved you, I muttered, clinging to the memory like a man gripping the last plank of a sinking ship. She lied, he answered without hesitation. She lied about everything. Because truth is heavier than love, and she was too weak to carry both. Alice moved closer, her footsteps soft but sharp, like needles on velvet. You've been living in her version of the world, she said, a world of half-truths and bedtime stories while the real war raged outside your window. My chest tightened, as though the air itself had turned against me. I remembered the lullabies, the whispered prayers before sleep, the way she clutched my hand when thunder scared me as a boy. Had all of it been theater? You're telling me she betrayed you, I said, my voice cracking, that she betrayed all of us. No, Alice replied coldly. She betrayed herself, and she died for it. The fire popped loudly, a shower of sparks leaping up the chimney like startled birds. Died. The word left me before I could stop it. They exchanged a glance heavy with meaning. They didn't tell you? Alice asked softly. Of course they didn't. The council wanted you blind. They wanted you soft when they came for you. My knees felt weak, the room tilting slightly as though the house itself mourned with me. She's gone, I whispered. My father nodded once, emotion stiff as iron. They made it look like an accident, he said. But accidents don't stab twice. The storm roared outside, shaking the windows like the sky itself raged on her behalf. I sat slowly, my legs refusing to hold me. Grief and rage mixed inside me until I couldn't tell one from the other. They killed her, I said, my voice barely above a breath. They will kill you too, my father warned, unless we find what she died protecting. Alice placed a single folded paper on the table between us. Its edges were burnt, its writing smudged by time and fire. This is all we found, she said. One page, one clue, but the rest, the real proof. They believe you have it. I stared at the paper as though it might open its mouth and tell me why my world had ended. You think I know where it is, I said bitterly. My father's gaze hardened. I don't think, he said. I know. The house moaned as the wind tore at its walls, a beast circling before it pounced. They will come. Alice whispered again, her voice like a prayer with no God listening. And when they do, blood will follow. The fire flickered low, shadows swallowing the corners of the room, like vultures closing in. And in that darkness I felt the first real taste of fear, not for the council, not even for death, but for the truth, waiting with its knives unsheathed. The old house held its breath, as though even the walls feared what would be spoken next. The paper lay on the table like a wound still bleeding, its ink smeared, its edges scorched by the hands of fate. I reached for it slowly, as though it might vanish at my touch, but my father's voice stopped me. Careful, he said. That page has cost more lives than you can imagine. Alice moved to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to peer into the storm. Nothing yet, she murmured, though her shoulders were tense as coiled wire. They'll wait until the fire dies. They like the dark. The fire snapped loudly. In the hearth, a protest against her words. I unfolded the paper. Most of it was ruined. Names half erased by time, dates smudged into ghosts of numbers, but one phrase remained clear enough to cut. The inheritance lies beneath the roots where the first stone was laid. My pulse throbbed like war drums in my ears. Beneath the roots. The first stone. I looked at my father, but he only stared into the fire as though it had the answers he wouldn't give. That's all she left us? I asked. Alice nodded once. They killed her before she could tell us more. The words carved. Through me, each syllable another strike of the blade. Then it's here, my father said at last, somewhere on this land. Somewhere they've been too blind or too afraid to search. The storm groaned above us, rattling the windows like the sky itself agreed. Why haven't they taken the house already? I demanded. If they want what's hidden here so badly. Because, Alice interrupted, they think it's cursed. The council believes the land itself will turn on them if they spill blood here. Her smile was cold as the rain on the glass. But they'll do it anyway. Fear never stopped greed for long. My father rose again, slower this time, as though the weight of the years pressed heavier on his shoulders. They'll come for you because your mother told them you were the only one who could read her clues. I froze. She told them that? She told everyone, Alice said bitterly. Maybe she thought it would protect you. Maybe she thought if they needed you alive, they'd spare you. Her voice cracked then, just slightly, a single thread of grief slipping through her iron composure. But they didn't spare her, did they? The room felt smaller with every word, its walls creeping inward like the jaws of a trap I hadn't seen closing. We have until dawn, my father said. After that, the council won't wait anymore. They'll come with fire, with guns, with all the shadows they command. And you expect me to fight them? I asked. I expect you to survive, he repeated, his voice carrying the finality of a verdict. Alice let the curtain fall shut. They'll come for the paper first, then for you. The thunder cracked so close the floor trembled beneath us. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck midnight, its chime rolling through the halls like a funeral bell that had been waiting for this night alone. I looked at the paper. Again, at the words my mother had left behind like a whisper carved into time. The inheritance lies beneath the roots where the first stone was laid. I didn't know whether it was a promise or a curse, but I knew this. Whatever waited under those roots had already drowned the world in blood, and it wasn't finished yet. The clock's last chime faded into the storm's growl, and the house seemed to sink deeper into its own bones. I folded the paper carefully, as though it were the last fragile bridge between the living and the dead, and slipped it into my coat pocket. "We dig at first light," I said, my voice steady though my hands trembled against my will. My father shook his head slowly. "They won't wait until first light. The council fears dawn, because dawn brings witnesses. They'll come before then. They always do." Alice lit another candle, the flame shivering as though even fire disliked this conversation. "We have to be ready," she said. "The servants have already fled. Only the house itself listens now." I looked around at the portraits lining the walls, the ancestors staring down through centuries of dust and varnish. Their painted eyes glimmered with secrets, as though every frame held a mouth gagged by oil and time. "Do they know?" I asked suddenly. "The council. Do they know what the inheritance actually is?" My father's jaw tightened. "They know enough to fear it, enough to kill for it, but not enough to find it without you." The way he said it made me feel like a map someone had forgotten to burn. Alice crossed her arms, the candlelight casting sharp lines across her face. "They think it's gold," she said. "They think it's deeds and titles and signatures worth empires. And it's not." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's worse," she whispered. The wind threw itself against the shutters like something with claws. The fire groaned in the hearth, coughing sparks into the dim room. My father walked to the sideboard and unlocked a drawer with a key I hadn't seen before. From it, he drew a pistol so old it looked almost ceremonial, its barrel etched with patterns dulled by years, but not yet erased. "You'll need this," he said, placing it on the table between us. The weight of it filled the room like another heartbeat. I didn't touch it. Taking it would mean agreeing to whatever madness had already swallowed this night whole. "What am I supposed to do with that?" I asked. "Live," my father said simply. Alice moved to the window again. "They're out there," she murmured. I felt the air change before I heard anything, the kind of silence that doesn't belong to empty rooms, but to predators waiting just beyond the trees. The storm seemed to hush suddenly, as though the night itself leaned in to listen. My father doused the lamps one by one until only the fire remained, its glow turning the room into a cave of restless shadows. "Upstairs," he ordered. "They'll come through the lower doors first. We need the high ground." We moved quickly, our footsteps swallowed by carpets worn thin by generations. The staircase creaked under our weight like it remembered other nights, other storms, other betrayals. Halfway up, I glanced back at the hall below. The front door stood tall and silent against the wind. For now. Alice led the way to the east wing, her candle dripping wax like white blood along the floorboards. We passed the gallery of ancestors, dozens of faces staring from cracked frames. I could have sworn one of them was smiling now, a thin, cruel twist of lips that hadn't been there when I was a boy. The wind rose again, but beneath it, I heard something. Else the unmistakable crunch of boots on wet gravel outside. Alice froze. So did I. My father's voice came low and sharp behind us. "They're here." The candle flickered wildly, as though it, too, feared the dark about to enter this house. The first knock wasn't really a knock at all. It was a single, heavy blow that made the front door shudder on its hinges, a sound that traveled through the floorboards into the marrow of my bones. We reached the upper landing and crouched low, the candlelight trembling like a heartbeat, trying not to be heard. Alice snuffed the flame with a quick pinch of her fingers, plunging us into a darkness thick as velvet. Only the fire downstairs still, burned, its glow spilling across the hall like a wound refusing to close. Another blow came, louder. The portraits rattled on the walls. Dust fell in tired little sighs from the ceiling beams. "They won't ask twice," my father whispered. "Councilmen don't knock 3 times unless it's for the gallows." Third strike split the night, and the door swung inward with a groan that sounded almost human. Wind and rain swept into the hall like uninvited guests, and then footsteps, slow, heavy, measured as a drumbeat before an execution. From our place above, we watched shadows stretch across the floor below. 5 men entered first, dressed in coats black enough to drink the light. Behind them came 2 more carrying rifles wrapped in oilskin. Their boots left puddles on the marble, as though the storm itself followed them inside like a loyal dog. Alice leaned close to me, her whisper sharp as broken glass. "They're early. Too early," my father muttered. "Means they're scared. Scared men kill fastest." The intruders spread out across the hall, checking doorways, corners, the long red carpet like a river of dried blood leading straight toward the staircase, where we crouched. One of them carried a lantern, its glow cutting swaths through the dark. I held my breath as it swept near the foot of the stairs, the beam stopping just shy of the place where our shadows might betray us. "We know you're here," a voice called. It was deep, coarse, carrying the kind of authority men borrow from weapons, not wisdom. "Come out now, and maybe we talk before bullets start doing the talking for us." No one moved. The man sighed theatrically, as though disappointed in our lack of hospitality. "Fine," he said. "We'll find you." He gestured, and the others began fanning out through the house, their boots thudding like war drums on the wooden floors. Alice slipped the pistol from my father's belt without a word. He didn't stop her. From somewhere down the west corridor came the crash of a door kicked open, then another. "They'll sweep room by room," my father murmured, "like wolves through a forest." His hand touched my shoulder briefly, steadying me. "When the shooting starts, and it will, stay low. Walls save lives more than prayers do." I nodded, though my throat felt locked shut. Down below, one of the men paused before the great portrait of my grandfather, the one painted before wars and betrayals, ate this family alive. He looked up at it, smirked, then spat on the floor. It took all the strength I had not to stand and put a bullet through him right there. Alice's eyes burned in the dark beside me, twin embers waiting for the wind to feed them flame. From the far end of the hall came the first real sound of violence. A servant who hadn't fled in time, dragged out by the collar, shouting, then silenced by a blow that made my teeth ache even from here. The man with the lantern called again, his voice oily with false patience. "Last chance, little birds. Come out before the storm stops asking nicely." Lightning flashed through the windows, turning every shadow into a black dagger pointing straight at us. Alice raised the pistol, her breath slow, steady. The house had gone so quiet I could hear the rain sliding off the roof outside. Then my father whispered the word that opened the night like a curtain cut by knives. "Now." Alice fired first. The shot cracked through the hall like thunder with a heartbeat, the flame from the barrel painting the walls for a split second in furious gold. One of the men below jerked backward and collapsed, his rifle clattering across the marble like a dying snake. Then the storm truly entered the house. Shouts erupted, boots pounding, the lantern swinging wildly as shadows fought against shadows. Another shot answered ours, splintering the banister inches from my face. Wood fragments biting into my cheek like angry insects. My father pushed me down hard. "Move!" he barked, and we crawled along the landing toward the east corridors. Bullets chewed into the walls behind us. Alice fired again, calm as if at a practice range instead of in a house about to drown in blood. Another man fell. Screams tangled with thunder, the old house groaning, as though it had waited decades for this night to come. We reached the door to the upper gallery and slipped inside. The room smelled of dust, varnish, and now gunpowder, a scent older than memory, older than mercy. Alice slammed the door shut, her breath coming hard but her hands steady as stone. "They'll surround us," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to cage it. "They'll try," my father growled, loading a second pistol from a drawer beneath the window. But this house was built by men who knew sieges. As if to prove him right, the first of the intruders reached the landing outside. Boots hammered closer. Shadows slid under the door like black water searching for cracks. Alice handed me the pistol she'd taken from him earlier. "Ever fired one?" she asked. I shook my head. "Point and breathe out," she said. "Don't think. Thinking gets you killed." The handle felt heavier than I expected, as though the metal itself remembered every life it had ended. The door shook with the first attempt to break it. Then again, wood splintered near the hinges. "Back!" my father snapped, and we retreated toward the far wall as another blow made the frame scream. When the door finally gave, it didn't swing open so much as explode inward, shards flying. The first man through meeting Alice's bullet. Before he could even raise his rifle, he dropped without a sound, his lantern rolling across the floor and spilling yellow light into corners that had never known it. The others poured in behind him like wolves through a broken fence. The gallery erupted in gunfire, thunder answering thunder, smoke coiling toward the ceiling like ghosts released from their paintings on the walls. I fired once, twice, missed both. But the third shot found someone's shoulder, sending him spinning into a cabinet that shattered under his weight. Alice moved like she had done this before, each shot precise, controlled, her face set in cold determination. My father fought like a man who had been waiting years for this night, his eyes bright with something fierce and unholy. The air stank of powder, blood, rain drifting through shattered windows. Someone screamed. Someone fell. For a moment it seemed we might hold them. Then more boots thundered on the stairs below, voices shouting orders. The council's dogs coming in packs now. Alice slammed another door at the far end of the gallery, bolting it behind us. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice tight but steady. "They'll burn us out before dawn." My father nodded, grimly. "Then we go where even they fear to follow." I looked at him, breath ragged. "Where's that?" He met my eyes with something like a smile, but it wasn't a kind one. "The cellars," he said, "beneath the first stone." The words from my mother's letter burned in my mind like iron against skin. The inheritance lies beneath the roots where the first stone was laid. The storm screamed through the broken windows as if it knew what waited below. We ran through the east corridor, the house shaking under the weight of boots and bullets behind us. The storm poured through shattered windows, smearing rain across the portraits as though trying to wash the blood from our history. Alice led the way with the lantern she'd taken from one of the dead men. Its light jumped wildly across the walls, painting us as ghosts fleeing our own graves. "They'll block the front," she said. "We need the servant stairs, less obvious, less suicide." My father moved with surprising speed for a man carrying decades of rage on his shoulders. He knew every turn, every door, every crooked floorboard in this house like a captain knows his ship before it sinks. The gunfire faded behind us for a moment, replaced by the sound of the wind crawling through the halls. I could hear my own heartbeat in the spaces between thunder. At the end of the corridor, Alice shoved open a narrow door half hidden behind a tapestry. A steep stairway coiled downward into blackness. "Down," she ordered. The smell hit first. Damp stone, mold, dust too old to name. The kind of air that hadn't been breathed in years, but remembered every secret ever spoken to it. We descended fast, the steps groaning under our weight. Above us, voices shouted, boots crashing through rooms now empty of prey. "They'll find the stairs," I warned. "They'll try," my father muttered. "But the cellars aren't a maze for men without fear." At the bottom, the passage split three ways, like a serpent's tongue. Alice didn't hesitate. "Left!" she said, turning sharply. The walls pressed close, dripping with the sweat of centuries. Our lantern threw restless shadows that stretched and twisted ahead of us like warnings. Somewhere above, the council's men moved through the house, their boots like hammers, driving the night deeper into the earth after us. The corridor ended at a door of blackened oak bound with iron. Carvings ran along its surface, symbols I didn't recognize. Letters eaten by time, but still sharp enough to cut the lantern light. My father touched the wood with something almost like reverence. This was built before the house, he said quietly. Before even the foundations. They found it when they laid the first stone. Alice shoved him aside and tried the handle. It didn't move. They locked it, she asked sharply. They buried it, he answered. Behind us, faint shouts echoed down the stairwell. The council's dogs had found our trail. Alice raised the pistol to the lock. Wait, my father snapped. This door doesn't open for threats. It opens for blood. I stared at him, breath caught in my throat. What? He pulled a knife from his coat, its blade narrow and dark with age. Cutting his palm, he pressed the blood to the carvings. The wood seemed to drink it. With a groan like the earth itself shifting, the lock snapped open. The door swung inward on. A breath of air cold enough to crawl along my spine like insects. Darkness yawned before us, deeper than night, older than storms. Alice lifted the lantern, and its light touched stone walls, slick with centuries of damp. Stairs spiraled downward into a throat of blackness that seemed eager to swallow us whole. Above, the boots grew louder, closer. My father pushed me toward the steps. Go, he said. The inheritance waits below, and so do answers. I hesitated only a second before plunging into the dark. The lantern swinging wildly in Alice's hand behind me, its glow chasing shadows down into the belly of the earth. The door groaned shut above us, cutting off the storm, the gunfire, the world. We had known, only the blackness below remained, and the promise that whatever waited there would change everything. The steps seemed to spiral forever, carved straight into the bowels of the earth. Our footsteps echoed off the damp stone, a chorus of trespassers disturbing centuries of silence. Alice's lantern threw pale circles across the walls, revealing carvings here and there, symbols etched by hands long turned to dust. Some looked like prayers, others like warnings. My father moved ahead of us now, the cut on his palm dripping steadily, as though the darkness itself demanded payment to let us pass. I kept hearing things, or maybe the cellar wanted me to, whispers sliding along the walls. Like threads of cold breath, shapes flickering just beyond the edge of the lantern's glow, we reached the bottom at last. The stairs opened into a vast chamber whose ceiling was lost in shadow. Stone columns rose like petrified trees, roots of black iron curling around their bases as though the earth had tried to reclaim them. In the center stood a single slab of granite, cracked down the middle like a frozen wound, the first stone. Even from here I could feel it, a heaviness. In the air, a presence like deep water waiting above a drowned city. Alice moved closer, the lantern light trembling across the surface of the slab. It was carved with words worn thin by time, letters that seemed to rearrange themselves when the shadows shifted. This is where she wanted us, Alice said softly. Mother knew. The mention of her made my chest tighten until breathing felt like treason. She died for this. I asked. She died because of this, my father corrected, stepping beside the stone. They feared what was buried here, feared it enough to kill anyone who came close. He placed his bleeding hand against the slab the same way he had touched the door above. The carvings drank the red greedily, veins of crimson lighting faintly beneath the surface like embers in ash. The ground trembled. With a grinding scream of stone on stone, a portion of the slab shifted aside, revealing a stairwell descending even deeper into the earth. A smell rose from below, old air, dry and bitter as secrets kept too long. Alice handed me the lantern. You first, she said, her voice steady, but her eyes bright with something that wasn't quite courage. I looked into the dark throat, yawning beneath the slab. Every instinct screamed to run back toward the storm, toward the gunfire, toward anything but this silence waiting to swallow us. But I stepped down anyway. The stairs here were narrower, the walls carved with scenes I barely glimpsed in the lantern's swing. Men kneeling before faceless shapes, crowds, fleeing fires, trees with roots that pierced screaming mouths. The deeper we went, the warmer the air grew, as though the earth itself had a fever beneath its skin. At the bottom, the stair opened into a long hall lined with pillars carved like human figures, hundreds of them, their faces eroded, their hands raised in gestures that might have been prayer or surrender. At the far end stood a door of iron, darker than night. It pulsed faintly, as though alive. Alice stopped beside me. "What's behind it?" she asked. My father's face was unreadable in the lantern glow. "Your future," he said, "or your grave. Sometimes they're the same thing." Above us, faintly, came the echo of boots on stone. The council was in the cellars now, their voices bouncing down the passageways like hunting dogs closing on the scent. Alice's grip tightened on her pistol. "They won't stop," she said. "No," my father agreed, his eyes fixed on the door ahead. "They never do." The iron surface rippled faintly, as though something on the other side had begun to wake. The door breathed, not with air, but with sound, a low vibration that rolled through the floor into my bones. Alice raised the lantern higher, and its glow revealed more carvings in the iron circles inside circles, symbols that hurt the eyes if you looked too long, shapes that suggested both words and wounds. My father stepped forward like a man approaching an altar he both worshipped and feared. "This is what they wanted," he said softly. "Not the land, not the house. This." He pressed his hand, still bleeding, against the iron. The metal shivered under his touch, lines of faint red light blooming outward like veins catching fire. Alice tensed beside me. "What is it?" My father didn't answer. Right away, the door groaned as though something enormous pressed against it from the other side, eager to meet the world again after too many centuries locked in dark silence. "The inheritance," he said finally. "It was never gold. It was never deeds. It was this." The air thickened until breathing felt like swallowing stones. Shouts echoed down the passage behind us, the council's men closing in fast now, their boots a drumbeat of inevitability. Alice raised her pistol toward the stairway. "We can't. Fight all of them," she snapped. My father didn't even turn. "They won't matter if this wakes." Something answered from the other side of the door. Not words, not sound, a feeling like the memory of a scream sinking through water. The iron bulged inward, as though struck by an enormous hand. Dust rained from the ceiling. The carved faces along the hall seemed to twist in the lantern light, their mouths opening wider as cracks split their stone lips. I backed away despite myself. "Whatever that is," I said, my voice shaking. "Maybe it was locked up for a reason." My father looked at me then, and in his eyes burned something halfway. Between madness and faith. They locked it away because they were cowards. They feared its power. Another impact boomed through the door, louder this time, and the red veins across its surface pulsed brighter, spreading like lightning through. "Storm clouds, they're coming!" Alice shouted as the first gunshot cracked from the stairway behind us, a bullet sparking off stone near her head. Councilmen flooded into the hall, rifles raised, their eyes flicking between us and the trembling door, as though uncertain which enemy to fear most. "Step away," one of them barked, voice shaking despite the command. "Whatever that is, step away now." My father laughed then, a raw, jagged sound that didn't belong to the man I remembered. "You think you can order the storm?" he said. "You think bullets will stop what's been waiting here longer than your bloodlines?" The council's leader raised his rifle. "Move, or you die with it." But before anyone could, the door cracked, not like wood splitting, like the earth itself breaking open. A line of red light shot through the center, splitting the iron skin, as though something inside had finally grown impatient. The wind from behind had roared down the stairwell, carrying the storm into the bowels of the earth as the door shuddered again. Alice grabbed my arm. "Tell me we're not opening this." "Udi," she hissed, but it was already too late. With one final impact that shook dust from the ceiling like falling ash, the iron door tore itself apart, the pieces folding outward like petals blooming in reverse. Heat rolled out in a wave that tasted of rust and old fire. The lantern's flame shrank back as though afraid, and from the darkness beyond came a single, slow breath that didn't belong to anything human. The breath from beyond the door was colder than the storm above, yet it carried a weight that bent the air itself, as though the earth had been holding it in for centuries and now regretted letting it go. The council's men froze where they stood, rifles trembling. For the first time that night I saw fear hollow their eyes, not fear of bullets or of us, but of whatever had just awakened in the dark. Alice gripped my arm tighter. "Father," she whispered, "what have you done?" He didn't answer. The chamber beyond the door glowed faintly now, its walls veined with red light, pulsing like a slow, monstrous heartbeat. Shapes moved inside, shadows sliding across other shadows, forms too tall, too thin, their movements wrong. Somehow, as though the dark itself had grown limbs, one of the councilmen fired. The gunshot slammed through the hall, its echo swallowed instantly by the black beyond the door. Something answered. It stepped into the lantern's glow, and for a moment my mind refused to name it. Not because I lacked the words, but because words belonged to the world before this thing existed. Its face, if it had a face, was a shifting mask of bone and ash. Its eyes, pits of red coal that burned without light. The air around it rippled like heat above a forge, and yet the cold deepened until my breath fogged between us. Another councilman screamed and opened fire, bullets tearing through the dark figure, but it didn't fall, didn't even flinch. The thing raised one long arm, fingers like blackened branches curling toward the men. The rifle barrels glowed red, then white, and in the next heartbeat they sagged like wax left too close to a flame. The men dropped them, howling, their hands blistered, their courage leaking out with the smoke. "Run," my father said softly, but I couldn't tell if he meant us or them. The creature took another step forward, its movements slow, deliberate, as though savoring the space between heartbeats. Behind it, more shapes shifted in the dark chamber, each one unfolding from the walls like shadows learning to walk. Alice raised her pistol, but my father caught her wrist before she could fire. "Bullets won't matter," he said. "Nothing human kills what was buried here." The council's leader rallied what little nerve he had left. "Close the door," he shouted. "Seal it again." But the iron petals that had once been a door now lay fused to the floor, melted like wax around a flame that had waited too long to burn. The first of the men broke, bolting back toward the stairs with panic snapping at his heels. The others followed, shouts scattering through the passageways like startled birds. The creature watched them go, its head tilting slightly, a gesture almost curious, before it turned its gaze on us, on me. Its eyes, those pits of red fire, locked with mine, and for one terrible moment I felt something moving behind them, something old, something patient, something that had been waiting for a name. My father stepped between us, arms spread as though greeting an old friend. "You are free," he said, voice shaking, but loud enough to carry through the chamber, free as was promised. The creature regarded him in silence, then looked past him toward the stairway where the council had fled. Its mouth, if that split of darkness could be called a mouth, opened slowly. The sound that came out wasn't speech, it was hunger given. Voice, and the walls themselves seemed to flinch. The thing moved and the air moved with it, not like wind, like a tide of cold, rolling out from the center of the earth itself, filling the chamber, chasing the fleeing men up the stairwell with invisible claws. Alice aimed again, but my father pushed her hand down. "Don't," he said. "It will remember who strikes first." More of them came now, shapes peeling themselves from the walls, each one wearing a body like a badly fitted mask. Some crawled, others glided, their movements jerky yet graceful, as though they imitated life, but had never truly lived it. The council. Men who hadn't run fast enough fired wildly into the dark. Gunfire lit the chamber in brief flashes of madness, bullets sparking off stone, punching into shapes that bled nothing at all. One soldier's scream cut the air, a sound so sharp it felt like it would slice the storm above in half. When the lantern swung toward him, he was already being dragged backward into the dark by something. Too fast to follow. The scream stopped all at once. Alice backed toward me, her face pale in the trembling light. "What are they?" she whispered. My father answered without away from the things now filling the hall. "The reason this house was cursed long before it was built." One of the creatures passed near the lantern glow. For a heartbeat, I wished it hadn't. Its body bent wrong in too many places, its head cocked at an angle no neck should allow, its arms long enough that the fingers scraped the stone floor as it moved. It paused near the first stone, the slab that had hidden its prison for centuries. The red veins across its surface pulsed brighter as though welcoming children home. My father stepped forward. "You were promised freedom," he said again, louder this time, his voice breaking against the walls like a wave against cliffs. "The blood of those who betrayed you runs through this house even now. Take it. Take them. Take everything they built on your chains." The creature nearest him tilted its head slowly. Then it moved, not toward him, but toward the stairway where the last of the council men fled. The others followed. Their steps made no sound, but the screams that rose moments later from the upper halls told us exactly where they had gone. Alice stared at my father as the noise of slaughter climbed the house like fire up a fuse. "You released them," she said flatly. "You opened the door and let them out." He didn't deny it. "They were wronged," he said, "buried alive under stone and lies while the council fattened itself on stolen bloodlines. This land was theirs before it was ours, before it was anyone's." The screams above tore through the air again, men shouting prayers, curses, orders that broke apart under their own terror. Gunfire snapped like dry branches in a storm, but it faded too quickly each time, swallowed by things that did not fall when shot. Alice turned on him, fury bright as the lantern flame. "You've killed everyone," she spat. "You've doomed this house, this whole valley." My father faced her finally, and what I saw in his eyes made my stomach twist. Not regret, not fear, faith. "They will cleanse it," he said. "Everything the council built on betrayal will burn, and from the ashes we begin again." A shape crawled along the wall near the ceiling, its limbs bending like questions no one wanted answered. Its head swiveled toward us as it passed, eyes glowing like coals dragged from hell itself. "They won't stop with the council," Alice whispered. "You know that, don't you?" For the first time I saw hesitation ripple across my father's face. Just for a moment. Then more screams split the air upstairs, closer now, spilling down stairwells like blood down stone steps. The house above had become a throat full of screams. Boots pounded, glass shattered, gunfire cracked like splintering bones, all of it swallowed by that impossible chorus of voices rising from creatures that should never have learned to speak. Alice gripped my arm, her eyes locked on my father. "They'll kill everyone," she hissed. "Council servants, us." My father didn't move. His face shone in the lantern glow, pale and fever bright. "They will spare the blood that opened the door," he said, but I think even he no longer believed it. Something slammed above hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Another scream, cut off mid-breath, leaving only wet silence behind. Alice turned on him, fury twisting her voice sharp. "You call this cleansing? You've unleashed a plague." My father finally looked at her, his eyes strange, distant. "No," he said softly, "not a plague. Justice." The word rang hollow, even as it left his mouth. One of the creatures returned then, crawling down the stairwell, head first, like a spider, made of bones and ash. Its glowing eyes swept the hall, passing over us before fixing on my father. It paused. I felt the weight of that stillness. The way the air thickened like it expected something terrible. My father stepped forward slowly. "I freed you," he said, voice low but steady. "I kept the promise buried in this stone. Now finish it. End them all." The creature tilted its head. Then, without warning, it moved, not up toward the council, but toward him. Alice grabbed my sleeve, pulling me back hard. "Father," he didn't run, didn't even raise his hands. He stood there as the thing reached him, its long fingers curling around his shoulders like roots claiming soil. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then he arched backward, a scream ripping out of him. That didn't sound like it belonged to any man. The thing's eyes burned brighter, its fingers sinking into him as though his flesh were nothing but water. Alice fired. The bullet tore through the creature's shoulder, stone chips flying where its body cracked, but it didn't fall. It turned its burning eyes on her, and for the first time Alice stepped back, real fear breaking through her fury. My father dropped to his knees. His scream had turned to gasps now, hands clawing at the arms wrapped around him as though begging for air, for mercy, for anything. The creature bent close, its face inches from his, and though it had no mouth, I swear I heard it speak, not in words, in thoughts pushed straight into my skull, like nails. Blood opens doors. Blood must close them. Then it tore him open, not like an animal killing prey, like a priest making a sacrifice. The sound filled the chamber, a wet finality that made my stomach turn cold. Alice screamed his name, firing again and again, until the pistol clicked empty. The creature let his body fall. It hit the stone with a sound that ended arguments forever. For a moment, everything went quiet. Even the screams upstairs faded, as though the house itself held its breath. Then, the other creatures turned toward us. Alice grabbed my arm. "We run," she said through her teeth. "Now!" The stairwell above glowed red as more of them crawled down toward us, their shapes blotting out what little light remained. The door behind us, the one we'd opened, still yawned wide, the passage beyond trembling like lungs drawing breath, and I realized too late that nothing we had unleashed intended to stay in this house. We ran. The hall shook with every step. The carved pillars watching silently, as though they had seen this before, as though this was always how the story was going to end. Alice pulled me toward the stairwell leading up, the lantern swinging wildly in her other hand, its glow shrinking, with each heartbeat as though the dark itself was swallowing the flame. Behind us, the creatures followed. They didn't rush, didn't need to. Their steps, or whatever passed for steps, were slow, steady, a hunt carried out by things that had never lost prey before. The stair twisted upward forever, stone slick under our boots. The air growing hotter, though the storm above still raged cold through the broken house. I could hear screams through the floors now. Councilmen, servants, strangers I'd never know, their voices flaring and dying like sparks in the wind. One of the creatures leapt onto the wall beside the stairwell, climbing faster than anything that size should move. Its long arms reached for Alice. She fired point blank into its face. The shot snapped its head sideways but didn't slow it. I grabbed a loose brick from the wall and swung as it lunged. The stone connected with a sound like a bell tolling over water. The creature dropped back into the dark below, vanishing without a sound when it hit the floor far beneath us. We didn't wait to see if it would rise again. The stair spat us out into the east hall, its windows shattered, rain blowing in sideways, portraits on the walls cut to ribbons by gunfire. And claws. The house smelled of powder, blood, and something older, something rising from the cellars, like a long-buried corpse tasting air again. Alice grabbed my face suddenly, forcing my eyes to hers. "We get the papers," she snapped. "We find them or none of this matters." I nodded, though my mind spun with my father's last moments, with the look on his face when the creature's hands sank into him like roots into soft earth. We ran through the hall toward Mother's study. If she had hidden the rest of the inheritance, the clues would be there. But the house had become a war. A councilman stumbled out of a side room, his uniform shredded, his face white as the moon. He opened his mouth to speak, but only blood came out. Something yanked him back into the room before he hit the floor. The door slammed. We didn't open it. More gunfire echoed somewhere toward the west wing. Short bursts ending too soon, each followed by a silence heavier than the last. The study door stood ahead, its brass handle smeared with someone's handprint, dark in the lightning flashes. Alice shoved it open and pulled me inside. We barred it. With a chair, though we both knew wood wouldn't hold forever. The room looked untouched by the chaos outside. Shelves lined with books, maps across the walls, Mother's desk, neat as if she might return any moment to write another letter sealing. Our fates. Alice went straight to the drawers, rifling through papers, journals, maps, yellowed by time. "Here," she said, tossing aside a stack of ledgers. But it was only more deeds, more lists of names the council had already stolen or destroyed. I joined her, tearing through books that smelled of dust and old ink. Nothing. Then my hand struck wood that sounded different, hollow, a panel behind the desk. I ripped it free, splinters biting my fingers. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, was a bundle of papers tied with black ribbon. Alice grabbed them with both hands just as the first blow struck the door. Behind us, the wood shuddered. The creatures had found us. The door shook again, harder this time. Splinters leapt from the frame as something slammed against it with the weight of a falling tree. Alice shoved the bundle of papers into my coat. "Run when it breaks," she said. "Don't look back." I stared at her. "What about you?" She checked the pistol, empty now, tossed it aside, and grabbed a letter opener from the desk. A blade too small for what waited outside, but she held it like she meant to cut the night itself if it came through. That door. The third blow cracked the hinges. Through the gap I saw one of them, its face too long, its eyes burning like iron in a forge. Rain hissed on its shoulders as it pushed harder, silent, except for the groan of wood giving way. Alice backed toward me, her free hand shoving me toward the far window. "Go," she snapped. "The roof slopes to the east wall. You can reach the ground." The door burst inward then, the chair skidding across the floor as claws like black roots tore through the gap. I smashed the window with Mother's brass lamp. Glass rained outward into the storm. Wind and rain slapped the room like the sea breaking. Through a ship's hull. Alice didn't wait for me. She grabbed the papers back from my coat, shoved them under her own arm, and climbed onto the sill as the door finally exploded behind us. The creature crawled through, its limbs bending wrong in the lightning flashes, its eyes locked on us like it had been waiting centuries for this moment. Alice leapt first. The roof groaned under her landing, tiles skidding off into the dark. I followed, boots slipping on the wet slate as thunder split the sky above. Rain stung my face. The wind nearly hurling me sideways into the courtyard far below. Behind us, the creature crawled through the window, head first like a spider, its long fingers hooking into the roof tiles as it came after us. Alice ran, half sliding, the bundle clutched tight under one arm, her hair whipping like a black flag in the storm. The roof ended at the east parapet. Beyond it, the ground dropped 2 stories to the old orchard. Alice didn't hesitate. She vaulted the wall and disappeared into the dark. I followed with no breath, left for prayers. The fall knocked the wind out of me. I hit mud, rolled, came up gasping under the skeletal branches of the apple trees. Alice was already on her feet, yanking me up as the creature dropped from the parapet behind us. Its landing cracked the earth like something heavier than stone had fallen. We ran through the orchard, branches whipping our faces, roots clawing at our boots. The bundle thumped against Alice's side with every stride. Behind us, the creature followed, silent except for the wet thud of its hands and feet tearing at the ground. The trees ended at the edge of the old family cemetery. Tombs leaned like drunks in the lightning flashes, crosses bent under moss and time. Alice skidded to a stop before one grave larger than the rest. The name was nearly gone under centuries of rain, but I could still make out our family crest carved deep into the stone. She dropped to her knees, ripping moss away from a slab half sunken in the mud. The creature slowed, circling just beyond the ring of graves, its burning eyes never leaving. As Alice slammed her hands against the slab, searching its edges. "There's a lock," she gasped. "Help me." I shoved aside weeds and dirt until my fingers struck iron, a ring handle, cold as the storm itself. Together we pulled. The slab shifted with a groan, like the earth protesting. The slab tore free with a scream of stone on stone, opening onto a stairway swallowed by dark. A breath of air rose from below, dry, cold, older than the roots around it. Alice shoved the bundle of papers into my chest and climbed down first, her lantern swinging shadows along the walls as she vanished into the earth. I followed, boots slipping on steps slick with centuries of damp. The creature came after us, silent as falling ash, its glowing eyes the only light above before it dropped. Onto the stairs like a spider descending its web. The stair twisted deep beneath the cemetery. Our breaths turned harsh, echoing ahead of us like hunted things. Alice didn't slow. The passage opened into a chamber lit by our shaking lantern. Stone walls leaned inward as though the weight of the earth tried to crush this place forgotten by men. At the center stood an altar carved from black rock, its surface etched with the same symbols that had burned on the door below the house. Alice slammed the papers onto it, her voice trembling now for the first time. "Mother hid them here," she gasped. "This is what they wanted." I untied the black ribbon with shaking fingers. The bundle spilled open, maps, deeds, letters covered in my mother's handwriting, a lifetime of secrets inked in frantic strokes. One page held the council's seals, proof of their betrayal in signatures, and bloodstains. Another detailed the land grants they murdered for. Names of families erased from history under forged decrees. Alice spread them across the altar as the creature entered the chamber behind us. It paused in the doorway, too tall for the stone frame, its body folding wrong to step through. It's burning. Eyes locked on the altar, then on us. Alice raised the empty pistol like it still meant something. "Stay back," she shouted, though her voice cracked. The thing tilted its head, slow as dripping wax. Then it stepped closer. The ground shook under its weight, or maybe under its hunger. Its long arms reached, not for us, but for the papers. Alice slammed her, hands down, pinning them to the altar. "No," she said through her teeth. "These end the council. They end everything you hate." For a moment, the creature stood still. The red glow inside its chest pulsed like a heartbeat waiting to decide. Then others came, shapes sliding into the chamber behind it, limbs scraping the stone walls, eyes burning through the dark like coals stirred in wind. They circled the altar slowly, silent, their presence crushing the air until each breath hurt like glass in my lungs. One of them reached out a long, blackened hand toward the documents. Alice slapped it away before it touched the pages. The creature hissed, not with sound, but with the lights in its eyes flaring brighter, heat rolling off its body like breath from a furnace. The letters curled at the edges, smoke lifting from the ink as though the words themselves feared erasure. Alice looked at me sharply. "Burn them," she said. The command stunned me. "What?" "Mother's papers," she snapped. "If the council can't have them, no one can." The creatures froze at her words, heads tilting in unison toward the altar like jurors awaiting a verdict. I hesitated, holding the lantern above. The pages, the flame wavering as though it too feared the choice. "They prove everything," I said. "They clear her name. They end the council." "They end us if they take them," Alice spat back. "Burn them." The creatures waited, silent, their glowing eyes locked on the flame trembling in my hand. One step would decide everything. The flame trembled above the papers, its light shaking over signatures written in blood and ink. over maps that had cost my mother her life, over secrets drowned in centuries of betrayal. Alice's eyes locked on mine, fierce, unblinking. "Do it!" she hissed. The creatures stood frozen, a ring of burning eyes watching, their long bodies blotting out the doorway, their shapes trembling faintly, as though holding back something worse than violence. I lowered the lantern. The first page caught fast, fire racing. Across it, like it had been waiting years for the touch. Flames crawled up the deeds, curling names into black husks, turning betrayals into smoke that rose toward the stone ceiling like ascending ghosts. The creatures leaned closer, their eyes brightening as the fire spread. The heat climbed my arms as letters blistered and split, maps shriveling into ash that swirled above the altar in frantic little storms. The smoke carried the last proofs of everything the council had stolen, the lives, the land, the bloodline itself, upward into darkness where no court, no history, no living man could claim them. Alice stepped back as the last page curled inward like a dying hand. "It's done," she whispered. "They can't have it now." The largest of the creatures moved first, stepping to the altar as the final scraps turned black and fell away. It touched the stone with one long hand, smearing ash across symbols carved before memory began. The red glow in its chest pulsed brighter. The others echoed it, their bodies throbbing faintly, like a single heartbeat spread across a dozen wrong shapes. Then they turned toward the stairway. Alice grabbed my arm. "Where are they going?" I didn't answer. The creatures moved up into the passage, silent as rising smoke, their eyes casting faint light along the walls. When the last of them left, the chamber felt suddenly emptier than death. Alice shoved the lantern into my hands. "We have to get out," she said, "before this whole valley becomes a grave." We ran after the retreating glow of their eyes, climbing the stair back toward the storm above. Each step carried the heat of the altar on our heels, as though the fire we'd lit there followed close behind. The night outside roared louder now, a storm ripping across the hills with the voice of something newly freed. The creatures crossed the cemetery ahead of us, their long limbs moving like shadows unhooked from the earth, heading toward the house where screams still rose under the thunder. We stumbled out into rain that felt almost cold after the air below. Alice turned in a slow circle, clutching the empty pistol like it might grow bullets again. "They'll kill the rest," she said. "Council, servants, anyone left breathing." Lightning split the sky, burning the orchard, the roof, the windows in brief white fury. Through the rain, I saw them reach the house, their shapes swarming its walls like smoke, curling into a burning tower. Gunfire cracked once, twice, then stopped. The screams kept going. Alice grabbed my coat. "We have to run," she snapped. "When they finish here, they'll sweep the valley." But I was looking at the house. Through the shattered windows, through the storm-lit rooms, I saw them moving. Floor to floor, burning eyes drifting like coals through a forest fire. And above the thunder, above the wind, rose a sound that didn't belong to storm or men. A chorus of voices speaking in a language too old for air, too heavy for the living to carry. The house itself seemed to bend under it, its walls groaning, its roof sagging as though the sound alone could break its spine. The house shuddered with every word in that ancient tongue, its windows vibrating until the glass fell like rain onto the flooded floors below. Lightning burned across the sky, and for a heartbeat, the creatures stood outlined in white fire against the walls, dozens of them now crawling over ceiling beams, through corridors, pouring upward like smoke rising through the ribs of a burning carcass. Alice pulled me toward the orchard. "We can't stay here," she shouted over the storm, but I couldn't move. Through the flashes of light, I saw the portraits in the great hall tearing themselves free of their frames, centuries of faces ripped apart by wind and claws. The house that had carried our name for generations cracked under the weight of its own ghosts, and above it all, the creatures spoke. The words vibrated through the ground, through my teeth, through the roots of the orchard trees, clawing at the earth like they wanted to climb out and run. I didn't understand the language, but every syllable carried judgment, like a sentence being read to the world itself. Alice yanked me backward, just as the roof gave way. It collapsed inward with a scream of wood and iron, a waterfall of rain and flame pouring into the halls where our family had dined, argued, prayed. The fire spread fast, too fast for wet wood, as though the words themselves burned hotter than anything human. Through the smoke, I glimpsed councilmen stumbling out of the west wing, their faces grey with ash, their rifles abandoned. One ran toward us across the courtyard, mouth open in some plea we never heard. Something caught him mid-stride and dragged him back into the collapsing doorway. His scream snapped off like a branch in the wind. Alice pushed me toward the orchard path. "Move!" We ran through rain thick enough to drown in, the bundle of ashes still clinging to my coat like dead weight. Behind us, the house burned despite the storm, fire eating its walls the way mouths eat bread, a hunger too deep for wind or water to starve. The orchard trees whipped under the gale, their branches cracking like knuckles before a fight. Lightning struck one so close, the ground leapt under my boots. Alice didn't stop until we reached the stone bridge beyond the orchard, its arches black against the river flashing below. From here we saw the whole house. Flames roared through its windows. The roof sagged inward, vomiting sparks into the storm. The creatures moved through it all, their bodies dark against the firelight, their eyes glowing like the last embers of the world. "They'll come for the valley next," Alice said between breaths. Her voice carried no panic, only certainty. The words slid into me cold as the rain. We crossed the bridge, our boots hammering stone slick with moss. The river below snarled against its banks, carrying broken branches, shingles, something pale that might have been a body. On the far side, Alice stopped beneath the twisted pines. She turned once, staring back through the rain at the house collapsing in on itself. "It's over," I said, though my voice shook. She shook her head slowly. "No, this is just where it starts." The fire lit the low clouds above the valley, a false dawn glowing red across the hills. Then the creatures began leaving the house. One by one, they stepped into the rain, their shapes steaming where water touched them, their movements slow, deliberate, as though they carried the night itself on their shoulders. They didn't look back at the flames, didn't look at us. They simply began walking toward the village lights trembling faintly on the far edge of the valley. Alice gripped my arm hard enough to hurt. "We have to warn them," she said. But even as she spoke, I knew no warning would matter. We climbed the hill road through mud and smoke, villagers stumbling around us in terrified silence now that the screams had thinned. The only sound was the storm behind us, and that low chanting rolling across the valley, like a prayer spoken by the earth itself. Alice moved at the front, her black coat snapping in the wind, her face pale, but set with the kind of fury that keeps people alive when reason has already fled. Children cried softly as they were carried upward by trembling parents, their small faces streaked with soot and rain. No one spoke. At the ridge we turned back. The village glowed below like a dying hearth. Roofs collapsing one by one under the weight of flame and creatures moving through the smoke. The old bell tower fell at last, with a groan that rolled up the hills like thunder too heavy to lift. Beyond it all, the house still burned on its hilltop, its walls cracked open, its windows bleeding fire into the night. The creatures had left it behind, pouring instead into the valley like floodwater that had found a lower place to drown. Alice shoved the villagers into the tree line. "Keep moving north," she said. "There are caves near the ridge. Stay there until dawn." They obeyed without question, a line of shadows slipping into the pines until only the rain filled the clearing. Alice leaned against a tree, breathing hard, her hair plastered to her face by wind and sweat. "They won't stop at the village," she said. They'll follow every road, every river, until the valley's empty. I looked at the bundle of ashes, still clinging to my coat pocket, all that was left of Mother's papers, the proof she had died for. "It doesn't matter now," I said, my voice hollow in my own ears. "The council's gone, the house, the village, it's all gone." Alice turned on me, her eyes burning in the dark. "No," she snapped. "They'll keep going, past the valley, past the hills. Do you think they'll stop just because we ran far enough?" Her words slid into the rain like knives. I thought of the door under the house, of the voices in the stone, of Father's scream when the first creature tore him open. "No," I admitted. "They won't stop." The storm began to break then, rain softening to a thin mist, the clouds fraying apart until moonlight slipped across the hills in pale ribbons. We stood there watching the fire spread below, listening to the last houses crack and fall to the wind, carrying those impossible voices farther into the night. Alice wiped rain from her face with a shaking hand. "We warned no one," she said bitterly. "We saved a handful of children while the rest burned." "They're alive," I said, but the words felt brittle even as I spoke them. She turned north toward the pines where the villagers had vanished. "We keep them moving," she said. "We find horses, cross the ridge before sunrise. After that, we tell anyone who will listen." Lightning flared one last time over the valley, showing the creatures moving beyond the village now, their eyes drifting through the fields toward the river road. Alice started walking, her boots sinking into the wet earth, her shoulders squared against wind and exhaustion. I followed because there was nothing else left to follow. The moon climbed higher, spilling cold light across the ruins behind us, across the black line of creatures spreading slowly outward like cracks through glass. And somewhere beyond the ridge, past the forests and the rivers and the towns, still sleeping in their ignorance, the world waited, unaware that its night had already begun. The forest closed around us as we pushed north, the last of the rain dripping through the pines in slow, cold threads. The villagers moved ahead in silence, their faces pale ovals in the moonlight. Children, clinging to parents who no longer promised them anything but distance from the fire behind. Alice led, without speaking. Every so often she glanced back down the slopes, her eyes scanning for the glow of flames or the glint of burning eyes moving through the trees. I kept expecting screams to rise again from the valley, but the night held only wind and the faint crash of the river far below. The creatures had stopped making noise once the village fell, as though sound was no longer worth wasting on the living. At the top of the ridge, the road narrowed between walls of black rock. The villagers slipped through first, shadows carrying smaller shadows in their arms. Alice waited until the last had passed, then shoved me forward, before following herself. Beyond the gap lay the northern hills, low and rolling. Their slopes washed silver under the thinning clouds. A single crooked tree marked the mouth of a ravine, cutting down toward the river plain. The villagers began descending toward it, their shapes flickering through mist that clung to the ground. Like old smoke. Alice stopped at the ridgeline. From here we could see the whole valley behind us, lit by the last burning roofs. The house was only a black skeleton now, its flames dying in wet timber and fallen stone. But the village still burned, bright, its streets glowing like veins through a giant's hand pressed against the earth. And beyond both, the creatures moved in a long, dark line toward the river road, their glowing eyes scattered across the hills like stars shaken loose from the sky. "They're spreading," Alice said. Her voice carried nothing but exhaustion now. "They'll reach the next town before dawn." I stared at the valley below, at the smoke twisting upward in the moonlight, at the black line of things marching outward as though called by something older than hunger. "We can't fight them," I said. "We couldn't fight even one." Alice didn't answer. The villagers disappeared into the ravine, their footsteps swallowed by pine needles and fog. One child looked back once, his face catching the moonlight before the mist closed around him. Alice turned north again. "We keep "Moving," she said, "past the river, past the hills. We find soldiers, priests, anyone who still believes walls mean something." I followed because the alternative was waiting on this ridge for those black shapes to lift their heads and notice us watching. The path narrowed again, this time between cliffs slick with moss and moonlight. Somewhere above, an owl called once and went silent, as though the night itself warned it not to speak twice. Alice stopped suddenly, her hand going up in a signal that froze the villagers ahead of us. I listened. Through the wind came another sound, faint, almost swallowed by the forest, but steady enough to carry across the rocks. Bells. Not the frantic clang of warning like in the village below, but slow, deliberate tolls from far across the northern hills. Each one rolled down the ravines like a question too heavy for words. Alice looked at me through the shadows. "They already know," she said. Another bell answered, this one farther east, then another beyond that, as though the night itself carried messages on iron tongues. The villagers began moving faster, driven by instincts older than thought. Alice stayed at the rear, watching the ridges above as though expecting eyes to open there. Any moment, the bells kept tolling, their voices chasing us northward through the dark. We descended through the ravine under those slow, steady bells, the sound folding through the hills like waves pushing us farther from the valley behind. The villagers hurried ahead in a stumbling line, their shapes swallowed one by the forest's black throat. Alice stayed behind them, her shoulders squared, the empty pistol still in her hand, though both of us knew it had nothing left to offer. Her eyes kept scanning the tree line above, as if expecting the creatures to come pouring over the ridges at any moment, but none followed. The night beyond the bells held only wind and the faint rush of the river far below. No glowing eyes stalked the slopes, no long-limbed shapes moved between. The trees, the silence felt worse than screams would have. By the time we reached the river road, the moon had torn free of the clouds, spilling pale light across wet stone and black water. The bridge lay ahead, a crooked arch of mossy blocks spanning the current's silver teeth. The villagers crossed quickly, their footsteps clattering like bones on the worn stones before vanishing. Into the northern hills, Alice and I stopped in the middle. From here, the whole valley lay behind us. The house, the village, the orchards, the hills where our family had lived and buried itself for centuries. Smoke crawled upward from what remained, twisting into the moonlight like the valley's last prayers. But no movement stirred below. The creatures were gone. I don't know if they took the river road east toward the towns beyond, or west into the forests where no maps reached. I only knew they had left nothing living behind them. Alice leaned on the bridge rail, rain dripping from her hair into the black water below. Her hands shook, though her voice did not when she finally spoke. "We opened the door," she said. Her eyes stayed. On the valley, as she said it, on the fires still dying in the wind. We opened it, and there's no closing it now. The bells tolled again, closer this time, answering each other across the hills, like voices gathering for war. I thought of the papers we had burned, of Father's last scream beneath the house, of Mother's letter carved in blood and warnings. The inheritance lies beneath the roots where the first stone was laid. The inheritance was no gold, no titles, no kingdom of walls and signatures. It was this night, this reckoning older than our name, older than the council, older than any man who thought the earth was his to own. The villagers kept moving north under the bells. Alice pushed off the rail and followed them without another word. I looked back one last time. The valley lay still now, its fires dimming, its houses broken under smoke and moonlight. But in the ruins of the village square, a single roof beam shifted, falling inward with a soft crash. And through the drifting ash, A shape moved on four limbs toward the riverbank, its eyes faint embers, watching the road we had taken. I turned away before it reached the bridge. The bells called across the hills again, their iron voices leading us deeper into the north, toward towns that didn't yet know the night had already left its door wide open. And above them all, the moon climbed higher, bright and cold over the dark hills, over the black line of forest swallowing our path, over a world too slow to realize it had already begun to end.